Welcome to another edition of The Point of View. This is your favorite character affair show on television. Here on The Point of View, we get the right guests, ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. I have a big guest tonight who's a former many things, but also a current something big. She's the Chief Executive of Human Capital Africa, and they are in Ghana as part of the 6th AU meeting to promote foundational learning. But she served in many capacities. She's been minister for, interestingly, two sectors, education and also, you can call it natural resources. So she has human resource and natural resource background. Part of the team that set up Transparency International, ran for president in 2019, was also World Bank Vice President for Africa. So Dr. Obi Ezekwesili is my guest. We'll be talking to her tonight. Stay with us. Welcome back. So tonight, my guest has managed to assemble some of the biggest names on the African continent here in Accra to pitch the urgency of the message of learning. The President of Ghana will be there. Dr. Olusegun Obasanjo will also be there. And of course, hosted by our guest. Other excellencies include the former President of Malawi, Excellency Joyce Banda, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was on this program a few months back. Also having reps from the AU Commission, of course, Aliko Dangote, and the rest of them. Jakaya Kikwete of Tanzania, all of them will be here to push the agenda of foundational learning. Human Capital Africa is organization. Our guest is the CEO of. Welcome to the show. Good evening.
Thank you so very much. Pleasure to meet you, Bernard.
It's good to have you. How are you doing?
I am doing great.
Wow. You've been relentless. Everywhere you've been, you are pushing something new. The last time we heard of you on this program, I think it was somewhere you were talking in Brussels about some issues to do with women. But welcome to Ghana. What is the real reason why you're here?
This year was designated by the Africa Union as the Year of Education. Africa's Year of Education. And this was at the summit in February in Addis. And we haven't been an organization that some 2 years ago looked at the data on what was going on with education and saw that a new data around the disconnect between being in school and learning or being in school and not learning was showing our continent to be in such alarming crisis than we appeared to be acknowledging, then decided that we would focus on it. Because, you know, look, I'm a retired person. I've gone through many lives of career, so that's not my issue. But my issue is that a continent that has given me the best of possibilities, we cannot continue to ignore this kind of data that shows that 9 out of every 10 of our children that are in early grades of you know, what we call 1, 2, 3, and by the age of 10 should have had certain kinds of skills, don't have them. What are these skills that they don't have by the age of 10? They lack the proficiency to read with comprehension. In other words, they read what a person by that age should read and know what they have read, and they don't. Or they should have the skills to do basic mathematics operation, summing, multiplying, dividing. They don't. They should have the skills of what we call socio-emotional connections and capacities. Then they don't have it. So all of that come together in what we call foundational learning. So because 9 out of every 10 of our children are failing, essentially. So they are in school, but not learning. Now, this is really like a tornado form of crisis, because it means that we are investing in getting more children to have access to education through the universalization of access So when you have universal basic education or universal primary education, you're making sure that more children of the age that they should be in school are actually in school. On our continent, there are 100 million of children that are out of school by the age they should be in school. And in my country, Nigeria, for example, some 20 million children are out of school children.
Wow.
So we have a massive access problem. But even worse now is that the ones who are in school are just equally as not being, not gaining anything from being in school. So that's a crisis. And that must be fixed because it is an urgent situation that we would need to tackle.
How did we get here? I remember in Ghana, President Kufuor introduced a capitation grant in the early 2000s and also school feeding program. And that increased access from the late 70s to around 90-something. This current president has introduced free secondary education. So access at secondary has gone up. But your point is that that emphasis on getting people into the school seems to have happened at the behest of focusing on what happens in the school.
So you have a situation where, based on this data, you could say that we're achieving quantity, but not achieving quality. And you know, the learning crisis is mostly a teacher's crisis. So work with me here. It is about, you know, the teaching process that happens at the level of the classroom with the children. When children are in school, it is not just about the quality of the teacher, but it's also the method of the teaching. The whole instructional process, that whole experience, that thing that happens between the teacher and the children in the classroom, it has to enable a transfer of learning, meaning that the teacher succeeds in getting a child to learn. So we took our eyes off many things on the continent. For example, we don't even sort of know when a child in the school is learning and the ones that are not learning. So we just lack the assessment framework that captures learning. So you can promote children from one level of schooling to another, but have they learned? There was a study that was conducted to measure whether ministers of education knew how bad situation was. So they would say to a minister, for example, what % of your children in early grades do you think are learning? You found that a large number would say 80% of them are learning, when the real situation, the reality, was that 20% only are learning in those systems. So you can see the wide disparity. So it's the same thing with parents, where they sort of think that because my child is going to school every day, that child is learning. They're not learning at the right level. So the system failed. So the education system, because there's a system that should underpin, give the kind of what we now call structured pedagogy. So it's emphasizing the matter of professional development of teachers.
Okay.
So for example, systems that have realized that children are not learning, and they go back and they say, how are we producing our teachers? What are we doing to really give them the kinds of skills that they require in order to teach in ways that support learning? You know, the practice of teaching, the method of teaching. How are we supporting the whole instructional process? How are we supporting the assessment frameworks? How are we tracking progress for purposes of accountability of, you know, those who should be responsible to seeing that learning takes place. Once we took our eyes all of these things, we got into trouble.
I want you to continue on the problem definition, and then we'll come to solutions. So you've distinguished between education and learning, between quality and quantity, access, and then the rest of it.
But and learning outcomes.
Absolutely. But there also appears to be other disparities. So gender, rural, urban, even you could say income levels.
Yes.
Income levels. Just how do those exacerbate the human capital problem on the continent?
Oh, very much so. You know, when you think in terms of gender, in that data, more girls tend to not achieve learning outcomes than boys. Okay, so already you have more girls out of school than boys, and then more girls amongst the children that are in school are not achieving those three important skills. So that's a problem, because it means that, you know, even if you wanted to achieve parity in terms of opportunities for engagement in society, you would not, because less girls are achieving foundational learning. Then if you talked in terms of rural-urban divide, it is the case that the quality of the teachers in the classroom in the rural schools are often many levels lower than what you find in the urban cities. The incentive to be in a rural school is really present. And then when you think in terms of social income, well, the kind of data that we have found correlates with the population of the poor, the poorer children in society, which is why any country that cares to be a resilient society cannot see this kind of a data and just be calm. I am not calm about this data. Yeah. You know, at the time that I was Minister of Education in Nigeria, I already began to see the disconnect between having children in school and children learning. In fact, I traced the disconnect between budget for education and what it was producing broadly, but then at the different levels of education, whether it was basic education, secondary education, and tertiary education. And I was interrogating that and using the findings of that to begin to propose solutions. So, for example, one of the major things for me as a Minister of Education at that time was the matter of professional development of teachers and in-service training.
Yeah.
For you know what I said about instructional materials or instructional processes. Can you imagine where they write textbooks are not connected to the lesson notes of teachers? The lesson notes of teachers have no kind of structure to them. And so when you teach children, you don't even realize that your children are at different levels of learning.
Okay.
And you just blandly teach everybody in class in the same kind of way. The instructional process is just, you know, totally oblivious of the levels at which people are. We know that children learn at their level. When there's a teaching at the right level. Okay. When you teach a person at the right level, they learn. And we don't have those kinds of knowledge in the teachers that you would have dominating the classroom on our continent. We have to fix things like that. There are interventions of those kinds.
I'll let you talk about interventions, Doc. I just wanted to...
You just want to stay with the problem still?
No,
okay.
Not at all. I want to understand why governments tend to find it easier to tackle things like jobs and skills. They say they talk about we are creating this number of jobs, we are building X number of schools, we are spending X% of our budget on education, we are building STEM institutions, rather than discuss learning and outcomes. Is it because maybe the calculus of being in public office and the demands make it easy? Because what you're saying makes sense, but it doesn't appear as though leaders are prioritizing this at all. What could be the reason?
You know, I first have to thank you for a very thoughtful question, because it means that you really are following this challenge. And it's important for us that the media, the journalists should understand it, because they've got to be the voices that are scrutinizing, interrogating, and putting people's feet to the fire on this. So thank you very much. So why is it that all other issues seem to be gaining resonance more than the matter of our children learning? It's simple. There are political incentives that drive political and public leaders, and you know, what we have seen is that voice and income or social status are correlated. So if majority of the children who are stuck in not learning are within poorer segment of society, there's not much of a constituency for that. They don't have political weight and voice. See the difference between what the elite of society do when it has to do with tertiary education. Oh, they have very strong opinion on that. Why? Their children are not struggling with foundational learning issues. Okay? So we're abandoning the poor and focusing on those with political capital and political currency. That's part of it. Then another aspect of the incentive is, you know, governments, politicians love to do things that are visible. I built classrooms. I built, you know, a library. I built, you know, without sort of saying, how does this impact the learning process? As I've said to you, this problem is core and central to the matter of the teaching process, and so the matter of the crisis of teaching, because we have a teacher's crisis. But it's not, if you just said, okay, let's train all the teachers, let's ensure some standards, but the teachers have to constantly go through things that have to do with, you know, refresh programs. They have to be coached on how to teach in order to ensure learning in the classroom. Interventions that have solved this problem, this particular problem, have been evidence-based. So they've been observed for helping to achieve it at scale. For example, what I said about assessment. They are, you know, school systems are lacking those kinds of assessments that track the progress of children. If you gave me a bunch of children to teach them how to improve their learning as far as reading is concerned, I will have to go with how much number of words can they read today. As I continue to teach them and change my teaching processes, my method of teaching, do they go from being able to read a word to being able to read a statement or a sentence? Do they, by the following month, would I have moved them from not just reading the statement, but the sentence, but when they read it, they can give it to me back in terms of a good comprehension of it? To how do they go from that to reading a page? Without stumbling and without being lost as to what they've read? And then how do they go from reading a page to reading a whole book? You know, so those, because the reading, if I am tracking their reading progress, it means that I am realizing that as I teach them, they're actually learning. They are not just memorizing something that they will not even remember or know anything about. They can connect knowledge to knowledge. No, you don't want that. That's not a learning outcome. So if I have a mechanism, a framework, an assessment system that captures that, then I can make progress. But we don't in most of the cases, you know, so people are blind to the fact that these children are just nodding away in class, but they are not learning anything. You know, so we have to sort of recognize that when the study was done between the UN, between the World Bank, UNESCO, and the researchers across the world to really pinpoint this matter of learning crisis. In the world, 6 out of 10 children are not learning, even though in school. In Africa, 9 out of 10 children. So look, we can't go by the standard of the world where we're way outliers on this matter. And we particularly cannot afford this problem, because whatever you say of we want to develop world-class human capital, how are you going to develop world-class human capital if most of your children?
Let me ask you the reason for your chosen approach at the continental level, because you could have intervened at the community or local level, you could have done national level programs, or even World Bank. You've been World Bank before. Why did you choose to use the AU to invite high-level people like President Obasanjo, President Akufo-Addo, and of course, former heads of states to tackle this from the top? Because you've done development work. You could have used any approach. So explain to me briefly why that high-level approach?
Because we do need all levels. So for example, the Human Capital Africa is actually supporting some countries already at district level.
All right.
So like our team was recently working with the district managers of education in Blantyre and another district in Malawi. We are doing the same thing with Uganda, and we will be working at district level. Then we also work at the national level of the ministries of education. Because you see, when you talk about education system, the stakeholders involved are multifaceted, right? So you're talking about the national government, you're talking about the state government, the provinces, the districts, you're talking about the community level, you're talking about stakeholders in business, private sector, because, by the way, they are the consumers of the skills that will ultimately come out of your education system, right? And then you're talking about the parents and the families of children. So it's an incredible canvas of stakeholders that need to see that this crisis, the crisis in education, is first and foremost ensuring that we can reform systems that enable children to learn at scale. We need the scale. So when you say, why the AU? Well, the AU, because the Africa data is not going to be changed if a few countries should do the right things in a few schools. We would still be a continent that is not able to take advantage of what's possible through our large population. By the way, we're the youngest population in the world. Average age 18.9. Wow. When you compare our age, our average population age to that of Europe at about 44.5 years, that of the US at about 38.5 years. You compare it with that of China. No, Japan is off the chart, off the chart at 50, I think it's about 54, And then you compare it, with even a young continent like India. India is still 28.2. Then, so China is about 30. I think it's about 37, So we are a young continent. Now, these demographic shifts can have huge possibilities for us, but not when we're abandoning children in school systems that are failing them. Children are not learning. If you head it as a leader, what's the first thing you're going to do? You basically assume the role of the chief learning officer of the country. Because you don't want to be a president under whom children are not learning. What's that? This is a problem that we can solve.
I'll let you elaborate when we come back.
Yes.
We're talking to almost the chief learning officer of Africa. Dr. Obi Ezekwesili, who's the CEO of Human Capital Africa, who are really determined to work to improve learning and learning outcomes on the continent. We'll link that to their 3 A's. They have 3 A's, not at A level. They have 3 A's they talk about. And then how does this all relate to leadership? Because it's one thing training young kids and helping them learn. It's another thing developing the next generation of leaders. We'll talk about all of that and more. Stay with us. Welcome back. Tonight we have a heavyweight on the show. Dr. Obi Ezekwesili has done it all. She's been involved in anti-corruption. She was working in one of the big four initially, and then she served in government in Nigeria, Minister for, interestingly, education, which is human capital, and of course solid minerals, which is natural capital. She's worked in both. She became the vice president for World Bank in Africa, and she's done a few other things, including heading the SPPG, and now she is the CEO of Human Capital Africa, who are in Ghana with, as part of the AU's latest program being hosted by Ghana with some very serious interventions. So let's talk about the 3 A's that you use. So, of course, when you did A-level, so you know 3 A's. It's very tough to get in 3 A's.
Yes.
I did SSS. So we had more A's, but they were for lower quality than the A-level A's. So no problem there.
Very
so
interesting.
For somebody to get 3 A's at A-level,
yes,
the person must be really a brick. You use, or the Human Capital Africa uses 3 A's,
yes,
to try to achieve this. Can you elaborate quickly on
I'll
this?
explain.
Yeah.
So the first A has to do with awareness,
right,
which is, for example, what I am doing with you right now.
All right.
You know, so we do need political salience on this issue,
right,
meaning that presidents who are blind to what this really means need to be given the awareness. Society needs to have the awareness. Private sector needs to have, citizens, the families need to have the awareness that children are in school but not learning. That's scandalous. You shouldn't be in school and not learning. Okay, because the system is failing to work for you. The learning experience is not working. We all need to know that. Awareness, that's the first A. For political salience, because those who must act on the problem, need to be aware of the problem. The second A is action. So you now know as a president that your children that are in school are not learning, and so your massive investment in education is not achieving the right returns, right? If children are not learning. Therefore, what you do need to do is to find whether there are solutions to the problem. You know, identifying a problem is not sufficient. You have to know the kinds of solutions that would address the problem. So we at Human Capital Africa have knowledge of the kinds of solutions that have worked. So things like teaching at the right level, okay, is a program where you're sort of like focused on identifying what level children are at in terms of their learning experience and capacity. And then you bring them together and teach at that level so that you're not just heading everybody along as though they are all at the same level. Teaching at the right level, these are kinds of solutions that have worked. Something like structured pedagogy, that is a comprehensive package of things around, you know, so the structured pedagogy is part of the way of ensuring that you are achieving this improvement in learning outcomes at scale. So that is a comprehensive package of what am I going to do about professional development of my teachers, what am I going to do about instructional, you know, effective and efficient instructional, processes, and of course the textbooks and the learning materials and all of that, and teaching materials. What am I going to do about the assessment frameworks, like I just said? How do I design the teacher-student engagement? How do I have a system of monitoring for accountability? So structured pedagogy. So that's the action.
Before we come to accountability, I just wanted to point out something. In Ghana, we say this, that public basic schools are more than private basic schools and generally have better trained teachers. But somehow, private basic schools produce better results, because there's a view that the private school managers insist more on what the teachers should do. So it's almost like a lower quality trained teacher with better supervision is producing better students than a higher quality trained teacher with low supervision. I just wanted your comment on that.
Well, you have already introduced the third A. The third A is accountability. There has to be accountability in the classroom. The teachers have to be accountable for what the children are learning or not learning. And then the school managers have to be accountable for whether they are supporting the teachers to be effective in teaching. All right, and the children to have the right enabling to support their learning process. The Ministry of Education at the state level, at the province level, at the national level have to have their responsibility, because you see what happens is in the public school system, everybody abandons the public school. They simply abandon it. When I was Minister of Education, one of my initiatives was about, bringing community action back around public school system, because we just simply said, why are we abandoning, especially the elite of society? They just go, and most of us got public education, which makes it very offensive that, we don't care about what's going on with public education. So accountability, holding the feet of governments to the fire, ensuring that governments are also putting in place mechanisms that enable those who are public officials who are responsible for education to be accountable, and not just to their superiors, but to the wider society. We have seen that all of these things go together. We take an example. There's a particular district in Brazil, a municipality in Brazil, Sobra, that has made the widest leap. When the first data came out, they were just as bad as us. The leap that they have made, because all of these things that I was saying about how you change from identifying the problem to solving it, those interventions that work at scale. As I said, just a few children now learning better is not enough. In Africa, we have this large number, so we have to really have interventions that work at scale, that would enable more of the children to actually begin to learn. Not that a few now start improving and we celebrate. That's not good enough. So Sobra, for example, adopted those kinds of approaches. It worked very well for them. So we have to sort of think in those terms of saying, how do we achieve this? A strong commitment, which is why the AU is important. Some of the things that we do, we find that the regional resolution forces action at the domestic level. So one of the things would be we're championing is the necessity to actually have a continental review and progress.
Let me ask you a Ghana-specific challenge and invite your reflections. So secondary education is the big issue in Ghana.
Yes.
Because the biggest policy of this current government was free SHS. But because it was a campaign promise, it's politicized. So the discussion around it is very political. A lot of middle class people think there should have been means testing and that we didn't have to have made a blanket free because they believe it will lead to lower quality. The government's view is that you have to make it free because in Africa it's difficult to, when you do means testing, the poor will still lose out. Whatever you try and do, if you don't make it blanket free, somehow the rich will find their way to get. So it's a very divisive issue. So two issues here. Education is great, but because it became a political promise, the discussion is politicized.
And it's probably polarizing.
Good. So now you have some middle class people have opted out, as you said, they are in private schools, but not everybody can pay for private. So there's a big question of quality now.
Yes.
All right. And so people are even doubting the results. It's, oh, these people, they pass because they are free SHS babies. Just your reflection on how to prioritize education.
Even at the secondary level.
Without necessarily over-politicizing it. Because you prioritize it because it's a campaign promise, you make it free. But now the discussion is politics. So even though education is the big issue, it's being discussed in a very toxic political environment.
Yes.
How does that?
Yes, you need to find voices of reason that would make up a constituency for education that are not, getting themselves wrapped around the politics. Because frankly, these children don't care what party you belong to. They just want to have a fighting chance like their counterparts in the rest of the world. So it is unfair for the political class to just, doubly victimize children of the poor by turning education into, a duel between Muhammad Ali and George Fraser. So you don't need that. What you just need is you need to have sensible evidence that will support whatever direction a government wants to follow. A lot of what creates the problem we see in the conversation on education and what policy direction to follow is because we don't support policy actions with evidence. A lot of public debates are debated without evidence. People just say, they just scratch their head and say, I think. Don't think. Let's follow the data. I normally say to people that in God I trust, but every other person must bring their data. So let's just work with the data and let us find out what would be the best in terms of how we are allocating resources to solving problems. For example, you talked about people building things and building things. So we found that money that is invested in raising the quality and standard of teaching is actually more beneficial than saying, oh, you're building five-star classrooms for the children.
So spend more money on the teachers than on the building.
It is so important. Wow. It is so important. So when we are allowing evidence to inform how we are allocating resources to education, when we are allowing evidence to show us that, hey, those with the capacity to pay for education should pay for education. Those without the capacity to pay for education, the state must be prepared to offer the opportunity. In other words, financial needs must not be a barrier to all children who need to be educated. That's why especially basic education should be the business of government. It should be. So you cannot sort of trade off that basic financing of basic education with quality of that training. You have to, it's dicey, it's delicate, because the fiscal pressures, I mean, wow. So, when you think of the fiscal space that countries need in order to fully fund the things that are necessary, you find that it's
So by the way, would this your intervention with the AU also lead to some freeing up of more resources? Because as you said, most countries after COVID are struggling. Some are going through debt crisis, some are in recession. So whilst money is not everything, money makes most things better.
Oh yes, it's
so
very important.
Does the intervention in Accra this week include a conversation about finding the financial resources to improve foundational learning?
So interestingly, your president is the chair of the sub-task team there's an organization known as the Global Partnership for Education. It's a global body of countries of advanced economies that sort of think we have to even more than normal support education investment around the world.
Okay.
So so there is a sub-team that your president heads for domestic mobilization, so that it's not only development partners that are putting more money to help to support countries, but that Africa's domestic mobilization of resources for education is prioritized. Okay. And so that's a key part of the conversation. But work with me here. Part of what really must change is the idea that just put more money to education and everything will be fine. We do need more money for education, but we do need more money well invested. Don't say we're financing education. We have to ask, are you investing in the right things that would lead to higher learning outcomes for the children. If, you know, the question that I would love journalists to ask every president, Mr. President, are your children learning? And when you ask them that question, if they are still sort of trying to figure out how to answer, you have to be able to...
Because there are rubrics to measure this.
Yeah,
there's 0 to class 3, the numeracy, literacy,
the numeracy,
and it's comparable across countries.
It's like precisely, you know. So you just have to say, well, Mr. President, not quite so.
So more outcomes than output.
Precisely.
Very
precisely. It's so important, you know. So when you see when you see the conversation on financing education, we need to tie it to learning.
Learning
outcomes
is the most important thing in
otherwise you haven't done right by the children. You know, see, we're not just saying, oh, you know, children cannot be capped at basic education. They must have the opportunity to move to new levels of learning because those capabilities prepare them for the world of works.
Okay.
So we have seen that children who are not achieving minimum proficiency levels in reading, in literacy, numeracy, and socio-emotional skills end up being the ones that fall through the cracks.
Wow.
Okay, they don't transit to the next level of learning. And for those that transit to the next level of learning, they are not going to practically show that they have the skills that the private sector needs. So your economic growth, so that's part of what we're saying to the continent during the AU summit this year, as the year of education progresses, we're saying that you can have an Agenda 2063 with great aspirations for the continent, and then your foundational learning.
Let's talk about the people you invited. Joyce Banda, Excellency.
She's, by the way, the chair of the advisory board of the Human Capital Africa.
Oh, wonderful. And then you have Jakaya Kikwete, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Aliko Dangote. These are continental heavyweights.
Yes, because, I mean, if the continent is in crisis, the continent's children are in crisis, what future do you have? You can't be, you know, people sort of say, oh, education is in crisis. Then they go to the rooftop of tertiary education and they start saying, if we can solve this, then we have solved everything. What a lie. When they tell you, if they should tell us that this house is in crisis, where do you think the engineers will start first from? The foundation.
Yeah.
That's the integrity of the structure, right? So here we are with education in crisis, and yet we're saying education is a pathway, because that's what it has proven over time, historically, that countries that have experienced a radical transformation of economy, of social progress, of political development, have been countries that paid attention to citizens who not only went to school, but actually learned.
Wonderful.
You know, and that when they got enough stock of those people, the change happened.
Wonderful.
So if all of these great leaders of our continent are saying, hey, we must pay attention to this data, we must do something urgently, and since there are evidences that when countries have basically taken charge of the problems, that they've been able to solve them, then we should not be lagging behind.
We'll talk about what politics and leadership has to do with all of this, because apart from Human Capital Africa, our guest is also the key principal at SPPG, and the thing we have to fix our politics. We'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're still chatting to Dr. Obi Ezekwesili, who's really passionate about education. She says she can spend the whole day talking about education. We have understood her point. Let's talk about leadership. In 2019, you gathered some leaders from Nigeria into Berlin, and you said they should fix our politics. I don't know if you were speaking for just Nigeria, but even in Ghana, it's a big issue as well. People feel like bad politics cannot produce good governance, and there's too much money in politics, the system is not accountable. Just explain to me what's wrong with politics in many African countries and why you think we need to raise a new genre of political leaders.
So I basically asked a thesis question of, is it possible that politics, the quality of politics, can explain better the economic crisis of my continent? So I wasn't asking just for Nigeria, I was asking for my continent. And so establishing a nexus between quality of politics, governance, and economic performance of countries was an important research question for me. And it showed clearly that for as long as we don't pay attention to our politics, we're not going to get good governance. Because a lot of people like me were called technocrats, right? So we say, no, I don't do anything with politics. A big mistake. Big mistake. Because we were that group that Plato spoke about. That those who think that politics is beneath them will ultimately be ruled by their inferiors. That is the story of our continent. It is the story of our continent. And so across the continent, you see politics abandoned to those who we think can, get in the mud. And then the best of the minds, the people with a moral rectitude and character, then say, no, we don't want to dirty ourselves. And so what do you get? What you get is the quality of politics that we have. So a lot of us then say, oh yeah, when they do their politics, we can do governance. Governance? You think governance is safe from the politics you just described? It is upstream at that politics level that government is decided. So when they've done all of their things in politics, you're waiting thinking that you're going to have good governance. My research says you can't. Wow. You have to fix it at the level of politics.
So governance is downstream,
it's
politics
downstream.
Is upstream.
Politics is upstream.
So if you want to fix it, you must go there.
You must go
That's
upstream.
The source.
Don't wait. By the time you're waiting downstream to, they now are in office and you're saying you have to govern well. They look at you and say, do you know all the compromises I made before I got here? Well, govern well? Sorry.
So how do you fix it? Is it the system or the people?
You got to fix the system. So my research showed that, you could look at, if you looked at politics as a service or even as a product, let me illustrate. My goodness, I hope you took away so I don't end up advertising.
Yes, we took away.
Okay, so if you looked at this product, and this is politics, this politics would be, something that has those who demand for it, and then it would have those who supply it, and then it would have those who regulate the two sides, right? So those who demand for politics are supposed to be the citizens, the electorate amongst them. Those who supply politics are the politicians. Those who regulate politics are your institutions, like the Ghana electoral body, the judiciary, the political institutions that are related to anything that has to do with politics. Now, if you looked at it this way, and my thesis was basically that for any product, a market environment that allows equal information, equal access, that allows free entry, free exit, that does not put any barriers or hurdles against those who are demanding and those who are entering in the market to supply, would give the demand side a better outcome. So if I used that basic theory of degree of competition to analyze Ghana's politics or Nigeria's politics, and what I am gathering in terms of the features of the demand side and of the supply side and of the regulatory context is not resembling a close enough to perfect competition model. There's a problem. So when I analyzed on the spectrum of the types of market that the product of politics is operating on our continent, most of them were not competitive model. They were actually monopoly democracies. Monopoly democracy is an abnormality. Democracy cannot be monopoly. So we have monopoly democracies, and what is the critical feature of it? The critical feature of it is that the supply side of Africa's politics has basically pushed the demand side out of reckoning. Citizens
no accountability.
Citizens have
no
no
say.
They don't have the capacity to influence political outcomes. The regulatory side is appointed
Compromised
and
by the supply
side. So you now have a system that basically, even if you prayed and prayed and prayed,
wow,
it's not going to change, because God has given us capacity. It's not God that monitors the electoral system. It's not God that, you know, gives the influence to determine what kind of quality of political people you have in your system. It is the human being. There is work for God that he does.
So it means you want to train the supply side, the next generation of the supply side.
Yes,
I'm doing to stop the
so
imbalance.
We're doing the three things.
Okay.
But the one that I'm talking to you about today is the school of politics.
Okay.
So basically what we're seeing is that the supply side right now is made up of a group of people who over time have become entrenched, and they've become so powerful that they have now a political culture. The political culture that subordinates the public good to their personal and narrow interests.
Wow.
And there are no consequences. Therefore, they have no incentive to change that behavior. So whether you elect DPP or you elect RCC, it's the same political culture.
Wow.
It doesn't matter the number of political parties. If that political culture is what it is, then clearly you can wait until 2100 and the outcomes would still be similar. So you have to break this. How do you break this? Well, there is a supply pipeline through which these kinds of politicians enter your marketplace of politics right now, right? That supply pipeline will immediately turn them into the same kind of people that are currently here. So that's why you can't see much difference between the old party people and the young party and the younger ones. Yeah. So what you must then do is to design a new pipeline.
Wow.
And produce that from that
new
pipeline,
generation.
a new generation at scale.
Wow.
You can't produce a few and say let them go in. They would be gone.
So they should take over and come with a new mindset.
You just need to do that. So
and that links to education nicely.
It very nicely links to education, but of a different kind of education. So for example, we have what we call an unconventional curriculum, where you have to take 140 course topics to graduate from our School of Politics, Policy and Governance. And these courses, multidisciplinary. Everything that we're producing the kind of politician.
So this will include ethics training,
yes,
integrity,
everything,
and all of those things.
It's about character, competence, and capacity.
Character, competence, capacity.
That's what we're training for. So when you go through a school, I'm producing. If I took you into the school now, by the time the 93 faculty that we have, drawn from across the world in academia, in practice, that is practitioners, and in experts in certain fields, by the time we're through with you, and you come out, I should vote for you.
Wow.
I would be comfortable to have you as my president. I would be comfortable to have you as what do you guys have other than the president?
We have a
at the state level.
We have a Speaker of Parliament, and
yes.
we have the...
No, but I know it's a
president,
centralized...
a member of Parliament.
Yes, but then you have state levels.
So we have regional
regions,
yes.
Right, okay.
Regional
so the people that we're training in our school, you would vote for them.
Wow.
You would vote for them.
How long have you been doing this?
So the Nigerian school is now going on to 4 years.
Wow.
We're graduating our 4th cohort.
Is it open to people from everywhere?
We're setting up the Ghana school.
So the SPPG Ghana.
SPPG Ghana is under design now.
Amazing.
We have SPPG Senegal already. They started last year. And then we're launching SPPG Ghana, SPPG Kenya, and SPPG Zimbabwe.
The relentless Madame due process. Incredible.
How did you get to know all these things about me?
That's my work. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
We wish you well. Thanks for what you do.
Thank you.
Good luck with the program this week with the AU leaders. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Bernard.
Wonderful.
I've enjoyed talking with you.
Always a pleasure. I've been talking to, we call her Madame Due Process. She's the CEO of Human Capital Africa, doing some really great work in foundational learning and also developing leaders. Hope you've enjoyed it. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.